Ladies and gentlemen, this is a truly historic occasion. There has never been a Talkin' Tuesday before Ohio State's football team played a game in a baseball stadium. So let's enjoy it together. And if you don't think that I have questions about that, you might have never watched the podcast daily before. And if that's the case, welcome in. It's a Tuesday. He's Bill Landis. I'm Austin Ward. And we talk about the questions that we have ahead of Ohio State's press conference in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Ryan Day, Chip Kelly, and Will Howard will be on the microphone. And yeah, I would very much like to talk about the friendly confines. Bill probably has questions about football, so we can start there. But I'm a little worked up about the nonsense.
Yeah, Ryan Day, and I assume only Ryan Day, like I guess Will Howard might get asked about it as well, is going to get asked a lot about playing in a baseball stadium, the turf at Ohio Stadium, and noon kickoffs, I would imagine. But you are correct in your assumption that I'll probably just ask about football because I'm more comfortable swimming in those waters, I suppose. But even with that, it's like what amounts to even a moderately glaring question about this team after you win 45-0 the way it did against Purdue, which what I thought was surgical fashion, kind of in all three phases. So there's honestly not a ton there. I think maybe the thing that is top of mind for me is more of a defensive thing, which is like I feel like it always lines up to like when I'm really thinking about defensive stuff, it's Chip Kelly's week. When I'm really thinking about offensive stuff, it's Jim Knowles' week. So we got
you off balance.
Yeah, I know they do. I guess that's the point, right? The stuff with the jack position and the 3 down fronts and the Mitchell Melton of it all, and I think it was only 4 snaps. So like maybe it's not worth the conversation that might happen with it on Tuesday, but I can't figure out how much of that was it's Purdue, let's have some fun, let's get the guys engaged and try a little something different, or how much of it was we think this might be a useful thing for us down the road when we play in Oregon or wherever we might play in the college football playoff. And maybe you can't make a determination one way or the other off only a handful of snaps, but I would like to ask Ryan Day just like a little more about what exactly that was, because I know after the game he said they didn't have Tyleik Williams. They thought maybe they'll mess around with a 3 down front. I think that makes sense. But I actually, in a weird way, like thought it kind of looked okay. Like I know the plays themselves were not good results for Ohio State. I am attributing that more to missed tackles than I am flaws in the system. Like I kind of liked Mitchell Melton like getting a head start and just running at the tackle, and I thought that there were some interesting pressures generated off of that. CJ Hicks was right there for a sack and just whiffed on it. So like I thought it looked more promising than it did anything else. So I'm wondering what Ryan Day thought of that little snapshot and what Ohio State might do with that information moving forward.
I don't think it was just for fun, because especially as early in the game as it was, like it has to. Surely that was purposeful. That's at least where I believe it is. Where I got confused was like if you need to find out if this could work against Oregon or in the playoff, like you didn't get the best view of what that scheme could be because you'd had the starting defensive line on the sideline. And I think you mentioned the missed tackles. That's part of it. But then Purdue was like, oh, cool, we might be able to run on this group of personnel, which, they pretty much did right away. They even did that on the opening drive of the game. It's like Edric Houston's out there and that first snap, like ran right at it. Well, Tyleik Williams isn't out there. Great. Maybe this will work. So I'm fully on board, by the way, with trying the new schemes, using new personnel, getting through the Purdue game and using that as an experimentation. By no means am I suggesting they shouldn't have done that. Or if you wanted to unveil the jack, that you had to do it with JT and Jack or Ty Hamilton on the field. I don't feel that way. I understand that was a good way to get through the Purdue game while also tinkering with looks that may or may not be used down the stretch. I don't know. But for if it is a fact-finding mission, I don't know what you necessarily glean from the various pieces that were out there that might not execute it to the fullest ability.
There's some important variables. I think that we're not on the field there. No, I thought the same thing. I thought the same thing when I saw it and I was watching it live, and then Doug and I were talking about it on Sunday. I said, I like the idea. I would love to see what it looks like with Tyleik Williams, JT Tuimoloau, and Jack Sawyer out there. And I think Mitchell Melton is maybe still that guy, right? That's Jim Knowles like showed up here 2.5 years ago, and one of the first things he said is like, Mitchell Melton, that guy can do a lot of things for my defense. So I'm part of me is even excited about that. It's like I think Mitch has played pretty well when he's been out there. I understand maybe given his injury history, you're on a little bit of a pitch count with him, so it is more of a change up than I think it is a constant feature of the defense. But even then, I think it's a pretty interesting change up. So I don't know. I'm trying to like temper my expectations with it as someone who has been intrigued by the idea. And I know I'm not the only one, but since Jim Knowles got here, and then just curious why it's never really come to fruition. Now that it's happened, I don't want to be like have it be the only thing I talk about, but it was interesting, I guess, that it popped up in that game. And I hope that we see it against Northwestern with the starting personnel, and maybe it won't look good, and then they'll scrap the idea and we'll never have to talk about it again. But it just seemed to me like maybe a little more to your point than let's have some fun against Purdue. I do think maybe it's just another wrinkle they'd like to continue to develop should they feel like they want to use it again.
The fact that it occurred at the same time that Ryan Day purposefully said this has been a re-engineering of the defense for the last couple of weeks, and then like the week before you're seeing some things that looks like Oklahoma State at Jim Knowles, and then the next week it's like, oh my god, it's the Jack. Like it does feel like Jim Knowles is being able to, I don't know, do all the things that he has done previously in his career. And the fact that it's building one week after the other new things that are not necessarily new to Jim Knowles, but maybe for Ohio State, like all of that seems to be done clearly by design. And I don't think that Ohio State does anything by accident or purely to mess around, or even in some respect, I don't feel like they ever just put things on film for opponents to worry about. Typically they go the other direction in these games and they play extremely buttoned up football. And, I think about 2 weeks prior against Nebraska and how, relatively vanilla you could say it was on offense, and even to some degree on defense, as they were maybe just starting to install some of this throwback stuff. But Ryan Day will talk about it because he has made it very clear what he thinks needs to happen and what Jim Knowles is doing by the way that he's couching it or talking about it publicly the way he did a week ago at this time.
I did chuckle a little bit when I saw it, because I asked Ryan Day after the Penn State game, like, just sort of generally, what do you think of what you've gotten out of some of the defensive changes we've seen? And he gave a really good answer to that, which is where the re-engineering thing came from. And then I tried to follow up on it, and then he like kind of pulled back saying, well, it's not like we remade things to the point of, like doing a 3-down front or anything like that. And then the third drive of the next game, they come out in a 3-down front. So I couldn't help but laugh at that.
Can't let Purdue prepare for it.
Yeah, right. So I do wonder if there's anything. So Ohio State could potentially from here play how many more games if it goes to the national championship? 7?
Well, it could play 3 regular season games. If it wins all 3 of those, it could play the Big Ten championship game. If it loses the Big Ten championship game, it would then have to play 4 games to win the national championship. So it could play 7. It might play 8.
Okay. Thank you for that math, because I'm bad at it.
You're welcome.
Just with that in mind, like, is there any more of a premium put on finding these little I think Ryan often calls them change ups off of these things, which is fitting. They're playing in a baseball stadium. It all comes together.
There it is.
Yeah. If there's any more of a premium on that kind of stuff in a season where you might get to the national championship game and there are 17 games worth of film to study for the opponent, which is kind of insane. I know that it happens in the NFL, but the NFL is also pretty homogenized. Like I don't know how much that might actually matter at that level. At this level, I think it is far more important. So like week to week, especially in November, as you have games stacked up against Purdue where you're a 38-point favorite, and this week against Northwestern where I think it's like a 31-point line, are you being more aggressive about finding the opportunities to do stuff like whatever, the jack position, stuff like the block punt, stuff like putting Travion and Quinshon on the field together like they did last week for a couple of snaps. One, to see if you can't find some things that might work for you, but two, make sure that teams can't get a beat on you as you go through the postseason. And there's just so much more of a volume of games this year than there have been previously.
Yeah, for us covering it, certainly for the coaches involved, for the players going through the length of the season, it's one thing to say in March, man, this season's going to be a grind. It's going to be long. You're going to have to play depth. And then it's another to get into the third Saturday in November and play your 10th game against Northwestern and be like, you might still play more than half of a normal season.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point. Even thinking about the adjustments to withstanding the year physically, what you're talking about is how does it change things schematically? Because it has always been a smaller sample size in college football than the NFL. Now there may be more variance in the schemes across the opponents that you play, but you don't have a ton of time to experiment over the course of the season. You might, traditionally you would have had the 4 non-conference sort of walkover tune-up games. That's down to 3. The ability to play Northwestern and Purdue is a potential benefit for Ohio State there, where they got a little bit of a reset late in the year and maybe a chance to get healthy too. We can talk about that. But, the ability or willingness to evolve throughout the course of a long season with what you're, trying to do on offense, defense, special teams, like that's new territory as well. That may be a tougher adjustment than anything.
Yeah. I don't know. I actually hadn't considered that until right now when we were talking about it. So I don't think Ryan Day's been asked about it, and maybe that's a thing that we overthink and maybe it's not in their heads, but I'd imagine that it is. Ryan Day has talked so much about the length of the season and keeping guys fresh that I'd imagine that part of it is on his mind too. And I think it helps that probably he has an NFL background and Chip Kelly certainly does. So, because there have been times, especially on offense, where, and it's not that like Chip Kelly's not been short on ideas, but maybe I've expected like a little more in the way of very obvious curveballs to throw at people that maybe haven't always emerged. And I wonder if that's because in Chip Kelly's mind, he's like, well, we're going to play 17, 18 games. Maybe like let's not unload everything in October. Let's save something for when we're playing Tennessee or whatever in the Fiesta Bowl, whatever that might look like. So, yeah, not to get you anxious about a potential Tennessee postseason matchup, although I guess it could happen. Yeah, because I thought that game against Purdue was a handle your business game. I thought the way the personnel was managed was really well done and the execution was really well done. But it was also, I just felt like some intentionality behind some of the wrinkles Ohio State was throwing out there too. And I wonder if the thought process we're talking about is it all on Ryan Day's mind as they're entering the backstretch of the regular season.
All right. So you have already thrown a changeup and a curveball.
I have. Yes. Sorry. That was also unintentional.
How much fastball do you think we'll see from Ohio State? Because if it were me, I would probably still leave Tyleik Williams on the sideline as much as humanly possible. Lathan Ransom doesn't appear like there's anything really bothering him as he's gone through the last couple of weeks, which is astounding. Again, we talked to him coming off the practice field on a Wednesday night, and he's just shouting out the coaching staff with what he was going through there with his injury. I'm amazed that we don't have to put him in the same category as Tyleik. Maybe can't do that as much on offense, although Ohio State did get Jeremiah Smith sidelined about as fast as I've ever seen a wide receiver on Saturday after that first half, although he did have to he wasn't prepared to go in on the second drive. I was watching him in the third quarter. He still had a towel on his head. And after they kicked that field goal, and it wasn't even after the first I think it wasn't until after the first play, they told Jeremiah to go get a helmet and went back in for that drive. But Ohio State did this in a way to manage the health against Purdue in a way that we don't often see them. I talked about that with Zach Bourne on Monday, but I think that they should do that again against Northwestern, where they are, 4 touchdown plus favorites on a baseball stadium, which has turf that last time they were in there against Iowa, they had to spend most of the second half tamping down divots. So if anyone has any kind of nagging injury, I don't think they should play.
That's probably right. I guess I would say to that at least on the defensive side, Northwestern is considerably better than Purdue. Although I say that, and I think maybe this is still be a case of, even though we're done with the days of the East and West Division, Northwestern's defense still being propped up a little bit by not playing many good offenses. But like by SP Plus, this is like a top 30 defense that Ohio State's going to see on Saturday. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they'll put up a little bit more of a fight and the scoring won't come quite as easily, although it was only 21-0 at halftime because it was a low possession, slow pace game. I think you're right. I if Tyleek is borderline, I wouldn't play him. If there's anybody else who's borderline, I wouldn't play them either, because you have a real one the week after against Indiana, and then you have Michigan after that, right? So you want to be in the best position possible, and you might have a 3-game stretch of Indiana, Michigan, Oregon. And that Oregon game would mean a whole lot to Ohio State. Like, they very clearly want to go to Indy and win that trophy. So this is another opportunity, or at least it should be, if Ohio State handles its business the right way, to manage the personnel the way that it did against Purdue. So I would anticipate that as well.
Yeah. We'll see. Now, there aren't a ton of guys, I think, in reality that fit into that category. It is first and foremost Tyleek Williams, but it's still.
And I even wonder, like Carson Hinsman, right, who gets like banged on the knee and was fine, and he came back, but like, could you throw Austin Sarabot out there and let Carson rest a little bit if you get to that point?
Right. Yeah, and that's the delicate balance, like, because we are still only 2 weeks into the Carson Hinsman at left guard experience for Ohio State, which they saw their offensive line lives flash before their lives again. Like, I sometimes we say this about games, like, well, yes, the ideal thing is to start fast and to assert your dominance and build up a big lead and then pull the guys. I thought what was interesting was that Ohio State was experimenting with the jack and putting Bryson Rodgers, for example, at wide receiver, like, playing other guys on offense even earlier. You really don't do that as often on the offensive line, and especially as stretched thin as they are with those 2 injuries on the left side at tackle. Like, they clearly are making, in spots where they wanted to play depth and spread around the reps as much as they could. But to your point, like, on offense, it's not as simple as that. If Northwestern's defense is good and that keeps the score low, maybe it just changes the threshold, because Ryan Day's tenure has largely been like, we'll get up by 35 and then you can earn your rest.
Yeah.
And I don't know that can necessarily be the expectation on Saturday against Northwestern, and Northwestern's not likely to score more than 14 points anyway.
Yeah, the Northwestern offense is still pretty bad. I guess travel roster might factor into that too, right? It's not like you have although everyone we're talking about will very much be on the travel roster. So I don't know if that complicates things at all when you're talking about rotations and stuff like that. But no, it should be a game where Ohio State can rest some guys in the second half and get ready for Indiana.
Yeah. What else would you want to ask either Chip Kelly or Will Howard?
I mean, Will Howard's going to get asked about throwing a deep ball, but I don't know what else he can say.
You think?
I don't know what else he can say about it. So I don't know that I'll ask that. I think maybe for Chip, I'm now that we've seen it, I'm very kind of keyed in on Travion and Quinshon playing together. And I think Chip has been asked about that in the past, and he said something to the effect of, like, you better be certain you have a really good third one if you're going to put your top 2 out on the field at the same time. So I get that there's a balance to that, and he probably wouldn't want to give away any of his thoughts on it anyway, but I'm just wondering maybe how much more meat is on that bone there, because we just saw a couple of years ago, was that the 2022 season, when UCLA had one of the best rushing offenses in the country, maybe the best rushing offense in the country. It was like a 3-headed monster kind of thing in the backfield, including the quarterback. And I don't know that Ohio State has had to get into a lot of that yet. And when it has done like the split back stuff, it's been usually with a receiver in that role, and it's looked pretty good when they've done it. So I don't know. I guess in a way that won't make Chip Kelly feel like I'm fishing for game plan information. I just want to know, like, what his thoughts are on continuing to find ways to get both those guys involved at the same time. And it's not even like it looked great against Purdue. Like the one play got blown up for 8 yards and the other one was a touchdown because Travion Henderson made a defender miss in the open field. Otherwise that would have been a loss too.
Yeah.
So
he looked like he was back in Virginia high school football on that one. Like it was not blocked up great. He was just like, bye.
I'm better than you. So I'm just going to go ahead and score now. Don't mind me. But like, I think people know what I'm talking. We've seen very few glimpses of it over the years at Ohio State. Like I think about the Curtis Samuel, Mike Weber days, and there's some like ideas there that I think could look pretty cool if Ohio State did them with Travion and Quinshon. But I don't know. Does Chip Kelly feel any more comfortable, I guess, doing that now that we've seen a little bit of it against Purdue is kind of on my mind.
It certainly felt like on Saturday that the third head of that monster, Ohio State, was ready to tap into it. I did not think that Will Howard would run the football nearly as much as he did against Purdue. Mm-hmm. And really it was right away. And I don't know if it's just because you are at the point of the season where it's like, you're not maybe quite as concerned about long-term injury risk. I mean, I'm talking about mitigating that on other spots of the roster. And then instead Ohio State's like, well, here comes Will Howard and he's going to run multiple times in a row down in the red zone. Like they did not feel like they were concerned about him getting hurt and running the football and being exposed to injury risk, which, it's been a long time since we've seen that from Ohio State. So maybe why was this the week that they felt like they needed to do that? Does Will Howard need to get those reps? He's run a lot in his career previously at Kansas State. We talked about that plenty. I am a little bit interested in that because it makes me think that they are preparing it for Indiana and Michigan, and because they don't need it to beat Purdue.
No, I think that was a let's iron some stuff out kind of situation. Maybe get Will a little comfortable with it. And I wonder too if there's any. I always thought JT Barrett was a much better passer once he got hit a few times. Like he just like got into the flow of the game, and more like he ran people over and then was like feeling himself and like threw the ball really well.
Yeah,
and like Will has said things to that effect throughout the year too. So I do wonder if any part, because I obviously he didn't start the Penn State game the way he wanted to with the pick six there, and they didn't really run him much in the first half of that game, and then they started running him in the second half, and the offense obviously made some key conversions with him doing so. So I would think that some of the thought process there is just let's get Will involved a little more early on, not just with him throwing the ball to our very good receivers, but let's threaten with the quarterback run early, have them thinking about it. Let's get Will into the flow of the game kind of thing. Like I was likewise surprised that he ran so much against Purdue and to your point, so early, but I do think it kind of makes sense on multiple levels, not the least of which is making sure that operation is running as effectively as possible with Indiana, Michigan, and potentially Oregon coming up.
Yeah, that's where the real intrigue lies. Not so much against Northwestern on the third Saturday in November. Although,
unless there's 40-mile-an-hour winds,
doesn't look like that's going to be the case. But I didn't think it was going to be quite as insane as it was 2 years ago when the winds decided to howl and everything got tossed out the window for that trip, for one of the uglier football games that I can ever recall. Which
do you think that they will play pregame music for this game? Because the last time Ohio State played Northwestern on the road, they did not.
Well, it'll be organ music, take me out to the ball game, and you got to have all the traditional hits. There'll be lots of Cracker Jacks out there, and the bats will be popping in pregame, so it's gonna be awesome. Do you think that this is as dumb as I think it? And not just dumb, like I don't mean to sound hyperbolic. It's potentially dangerous, and I know that they have played other games there. But the fact that the Big Ten is not like, I think they could look at it and be like, well, it's Northwestern and Iowa. If something happens, no one's going to notice. But if something happens to Ohio State in the midst of a national championship push, and the Big Ten's just like, it's fine, Northwestern, you can play in this baseball stadium where nobody even knows like which hallway the players are going to go down to get to the bus or where they're going to change clothes and put on pads, like, or can the media fit into the visitors' dugout after the game? Like, what are we talking about? Forget all that. Just the turf that they're laying down on the infield is madness to me.
Yeah. There's a lot with it. Like, I guess maybe the first thing I would say is It's odd. It's not ideal. Ohio State would be doing itself no favors if that's all it's thinking about this week. So I hope that's not the case. Not that I find Northwestern particularly dangerous, but it can just take you out of your game a little bit if you're kind of consumed by that. So I hope that the team itself is not. Maybe the logistics people and travel people are, but that's okay as long as the players and coaches aren't. Right. Part of me likes the novelty, like the sight lines and like it is a historic venue, but I think I'm mostly of the mind that I don't like playing football in places where football is not meant to be played. So I would prefer that this game probably be at Soldier Field, or I don't even know where else it could be. Although I guess the turf at Soldier Field also sucks. I don't know. I think it'll be one of those, the Hoosier Dome. Yeah, we will reconstruct the Hoosier Dome. I think it'll be cool for the fans in attendance who go to see it. I think it'll be cool for the first couple minutes on TV until the novelty wears off, and then after that, maybe it's just like, why are we playing this game here again? I don't know. Like, it is a unique thing. It is, one of the biggest brands in North American sport doing a odd thing that you don't get to see all that often. So I understand that part of it, but if there's anyone wishing this game was being played in an actual football stadium, I don't blame you.
I hope everyone is wishing for that, because this shouldn't be allowed to continue. But that's just me. I guess we'll find out if Ryan Day agrees. And even if he doesn't, we probably won't get any real insight on that, because there's nothing he can do about it. The game is 5 days away, and they're going to play Northwestern at Wrigley Field. So the best you can do is prepare and make the best of it. And so ultimately, I'll do the same thing in my coverage the rest of the week, but I bet I'll probably complain about it more. But I don't have to play on Saturday, so that doesn't make any difference. Anyway, we're going to be in the Woody Hayes Athletic Center later today, which is Tuesday. We're going to hear from Ryan Day. We're going to hear from Chip Kelly. We're going to hear from Will Howard. And then afterwards, we'll have some snap judgments. We'll be back on Wednesday. It'll be an interesting stock watch when we get back tomorrow, because we've got a bunch of new players that are in the mix that we can talk about making fake investments with. So get excited for that. And also, the press conference will be streamed on the podcast YouTube channel. So don't miss it. Thanks for joining us on a Talkin' Tuesday, the podcast daily, getting ready for Ohio State and Northwestern. He is Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. So long.